Gliders have been a part of the Mario Kart series since Mario Kart 7 was released in 2011, and Mario Kart World is no different. However, Nintendo did make a change to the gliders in this game, whereby you can no longer choose from a selection of gliders with different stats. Instead, every vehicle just grows a pair of wings after you go over a glider ramp. This change doesn't really matter though, since the stat differences between the gliders in previous games weren't incredibly significant anyway. What does matter is that the control you have in glider sections in this game is different than in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. You can't turn as quickly when you're in the air compared to before, and there haven't been any crazy techniques discovered yet like Motion Glider or Gensua Glider in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. As a result, I don't like the gliders in this game all that much, so I wanted to see how many of the glider sections you can completely avoid, and I did find a lot of cool strategies to get past sections I didn't expect to. Before we get into it, I should mention that I will be trying to get past each section without the wings on my vehicle appearing at all, since sometimes Lag 2 will respawn you in the middle of a glider section. So a skip will only fully count if I can get past the glider ramp and either land on the other side of the gap or get a respawn that puts me on the other side of the gap without the wings appearing. If there is a section where I can't complete a full skip, I will still try to see if the glider ramp itself can be entirely avoided, since there can be situations where Lag 2 will place you before a glider ramp if you fall off at the beginning of a glider section. Finally, I will only be using mushrooms to help me in this video, since that is all that is available in the time trial mode. Now let's not waste any more time and get into it. Of course, to start things off, I can immediately cross off any track that doesn't have a glider at all, which is 12 out of the 30 tracks. Then there are also some tracks that have a glider as an optional path, such as the beginning of Sky High Sunday or the ending of Mario Bros Circuit, which crosses off another 6 tracks from the list. This left me with 12 tracks that had at least one glider section that is supposedly required in order to complete the track. The first one being Crown City, which has one glider ramp at the end of section 2. Luckily, this ramp is very elevated above the road, so all I had to do was jump off the platform a bit earlier on the right and land on the road to get an easy skip to start things off. But of course, it wasn't going to be as simple as this every time. The second track in the list is DK Spaceport, which has one glider ramp at the start that looks at first like it has an easy workaround. The 2 railings on either side of the ramp look like an obvious way to avoid getting the glider effect, but when I went off the end of one, I still got given wings. This happens on every single rail that is adjacent to a glider ramp in this game, which is something I would have to keep in mind several times in this video. The way to avoid this from happening is to just jump off the rail before the glider effect kicks in. So I tried that in the hope that Lag 2 would be kind to me and respawn me onto the road on the other side of the gap. To be honest, I expected to be placed in the air, so I was very happy when Lag 2 took me all the way to the platform to let me cross off a second track. Lag 2 being that generous to me made me feel more optimistic about the next track in the list, which is Shy Guy Bazaar. The glider at the end of this track was one I was more worried about at first, because it is quite a large gap between the ramp and the road, but after DK Spaceport I thought that Lag 2 might bail me out here as well. As soon as I got to the glider, I charge jumped on the left as far as I could, but sadly I got respawned in the middle of the glider section. When I charge jumped to the right side of the glider ramp, the same thing happened, proving that this gap might be my first real problem in the video. Obviously, the issue here is that I'm not jumping far enough over the gap, so I decided to gather up 20 coins before trying again. I thought that the speed increase I'd get might be just enough to make a difference, and in a way I was right. After doing the charge jump with 20 coins, Lag 2 did give me a respawn a lot closer to the road, but unfortunately it still caused the wings to appear on the bike. This made me wonder how far I would actually have to jump to get a favourable respawn, so I went to the other side and just jumped off into the void in a place I thought was impossible to reach from the glider platform, and the respawn was still not what I would have needed for this to be possible. This meant that the only way this would work is to actually just make it across the gap without relying on a respawn, and I had ruled that out as a possibility in my head already. I did try switching my combo to Bowser on the Real Racer to give me as much speed as possible, but I was still nowhere near making it over the gap. I did have one final long shot idea to somehow use the support beams underneath the platform to get extra height, but as soon as I touched anything below the normal road, Lag 2 picked me up, forcing me to give up and rule Shy Guy Bazaar impossible to complete without using a glider. After my first failure to skip a glider section, I was hoping that I would be able to bounce back immediately, but that was obviously not going to happen when I saw what the next track in the list was. Airship Fortress has a very long cannon glider that is obviously impossible to get past, so I just wanted to at least be able to skip the glider ramp itself. The only method I could try was to jump onto the wall and trick over the ramp and respawn past it, but when I did it, Lakitu actually placed me back into the ship, making it seem like this would be the first unavoidable glider ramp in the game. Thankfully, I tried a few more times and did end up getting enough distance to respawn in the air, but of course that doesn't change that it's still the second track in the list with an unavoidable glider section. The next track is Starview Peak, which is the first in the video with multiple glider sections, one in the middle and one at the end. The first one is similar to DK Spaceport with the rails on the side of the road, so I again had to trick off the side early. This time though, there is a floating candle spike thing on the left that you can trick off to get a bit more height for the jump, and this extra height was helpful because I immediately got respawned onto the water. That wasn't the hard part of the track though, since the second glider covers more distance than the first. However, I did already have a strategy in mind for this section because I knew that you could ride on the walls on the side. So my plan was to charge jump onto one of the walls, then trick back off it to land on the platform, or to get close enough to get a good respawn. When I got there, I decided to aim for the left side since the road is a bit higher. On one of my first few attempts, I accidentally hit the glider, but I decided to stick to it and see how far I could get by jumping off the wall. I got pretty close, but Lakitu respawned me in the air, so now I knew that I needed to make it all the way over the gap, and since I didn't use a mushroom when on the wall, I was fairly certain it could be done. After a few more failed attempts, I decided to switch over to the right side to see if that made it at all easier. And that turned out to be a good choice, because almost immediately I got good height from the charge jump and had just enough speed to get over the entire gap, confirming that both glider sections on Starview Peak can be completely avoided. After Starview Peak, I headed to Peach Beach, which has a glider at the beginning of the final section. This one was a lot easier to get past than most of the others, since you can just climb over the wall on either side and ride the rooftops. There are even coins to grab up here. It was clearly an intentional path that I just wasn't aware of, so that's cool. The next one is nowhere near as simple though, because Great Question Block Ruins has a ridiculously long glider at the end of the track. There are actually two glider sections on this track. The first one being a glider ring you can go through if you ride the rail at the top of the wall where the second item set is, but obviously this one is avoidable like any other split path glider. The problem is that the other glider is just obviously not skippable. The only way I could have even considered it being possible is if you could bounce off the clouds on the right, but Lakitu picks you up before you can hit the first one. It does respawn you past the glider ramp though, so there still aren't any glider ramps that are completely unavoidable yet. I knew going into this video that Great Question Block Ruins wouldn't work, but I also knew that the next track in the list was definitely going to work, which is Boo Cinema. This was because a few days beforehand I saw in the World Record Discord server that avoiding the glider can actually be slightly faster. Of course, for this video I didn't need to be fast, so I just copied the clip that I saw by tricking off the road to the right of the glider and landing on the road below. Another simple track to beat was next in the list, since the main glider on Drybones Burnout doesn't have a void below it, instead there is a massive pool of lava. When you jump into the lava, you will sink for a couple seconds, then get respawned back before the glider ramp. But if you use a mushroom when you land on the lava, you can just drive to the other side, making it very easy to skip the entire glider section. With some momentum from the previous two tracks, I went into Bowser's Castle with some hope that I could pull something off, but then I was reminded that the cannon glider at the start is literally vertical, so it would be impossible to get past. I did manage to skip the glider ramp here though after a few attempts of just jumping into the lava. Of course, the final glider on this track is easily skipped by just taking the other path, but the second glider is a different story. At first, this gap looks too big to clear, and after trying to just charge jump to the other side, it was clear to me that I would need to get creative if this was going to work. My first instinct was to try and get some extra height by tricking off the pole on the right, but my first attempt didn't make it seem like a promising idea. Naturally, I then tried to use the pole on the left instead, but that also didn't give me anywhere near enough distance to make it over the gap. However, in one of my failed attempts to hit the pole, I instead tricked off one of the yellow spinning enemies that I don't know the name of, which whilst I didn't intend to do, I wasn't at all surprised that it was possible because you can trick on basically anything in this game. So now I thought I should just aim to trick off these things and see what happens, but I still couldn't get enough distance to clear the gap or get a good respawn. After a few attempts to do the same thing on the right side and failing miserably, I decided it was time to switch over to the Bowser Real Racer combo for the maximum speed. At first, it seemed like this combo would make this a lot easier than before because I immediately got a jump that got incredibly close to the third yellow spinning thing. However, after many more attempts, I couldn't get any further, and the respawn still wasn't being kind to me. I tried tricking off the pole again and it did get me slightly closer, but it still wasn't enough. So in the end, I stopped the attempts thinking that it might just be out of reach. Until the next day, I realised that I hadn't tried going on the left side with Bowser yet, so I went back to the track and immediately got an attempt that tricked off one of the first yellow spinning things. I really should learn what these things are called, and got very close to the third one. Then on an attempt quickly afterwards, I went even further, and whilst I didn't manage to trick off another yellow spinning thing, I actually got close enough to the platform for Lakitu to finally drop me on the road on the other side, rendering it possible to entirely skip the second glider section on Bowser's Castle. Not only that, straight afterwards I managed to clear the gap without needing Lakitu at all by finally getting the second trick I was aiming for the whole time, which was really fun to do. I even went back to my fishbone combo and it worked immediately. I didn't even need the second trick this time, I just flew far enough from the first one, so I don't really know why it didn't work the day before. Either way, it meant I could move on to Acorn Heights with my head held high. But this didn't last long when I realised just how far I would have to jump on this track. To add on to that, there were rails on either side of the glider, so I could only do attempts by tricking off the side early, making it even more unfathomable for this to be possible. The only chance I thought I might have is if I somehow managed to trick off the acorn in the air, but I just couldn't get anywhere near it and the respawn wasn't at all close to working either, so I quickly ruled this one out as impossible. This left me with only one track left, the final track in the game, Rainbow Road. This track has 6 different gliders on it, and they all cover very long distances, so I didn't have much hope going into this one, but I did at least want to get past every glider ramp, since up until this point there hadn't been any that weren't skippable. To cut a long story short, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th glider sections on this track I only had to try once to know that they couldn't be done, but I did think there was a chance I could work something out for the first and last gliders. The first gap is the smallest on the track, so I thought that maybe Lakitu would give you a good respawn if you jumped as far as possible. I tried charge jumping off the edge a few times, but Lakitu kept placing me really high in the air, so it didn't seem like a good respawn was going to happen. I then thought that maybe you could try and trick off the spinning circles to get all the way onto the road in a similar way to Bowser's Castle, but it turns out that they don't have any hitbox, making a jump all the way across to the other side completely unrealistic. I did have one final idea though as a last resort, which involved wall riding on the side of the road rather than just doing a regular charge jump. Since the glider ramp takes up some space at the end of the platform, the wall actually extends a bit further than the normal road, so I thought it was worth a try to see if it would actually make a difference. After a few tries, I got an attempt that looked like it was making it pretty far, and to my surprise, Lakitu actually dropped me straight onto the road. I did not expect to actually get past one of the glider sections on this track, so I was really pleased I figured that one out. Now the final glider section is a bigger gap than the first one, but I thought that the bottom of the finish line being quite low might make it doable as well. I tried doing the same wall ride strategy, but it ended up being pretty clear that the finish line was just too far away, and this time Lakitu wasn't kind to me, so I had to sadly rule this one out. Of course, I could still skip this final glider ramp pretty easily, but that wasn't the case for all the rest of them. The third glider ramp was fairly simple as I just had to jump as straight as possible to get a good respawn, and the 5th glider ramp was even easier as you can jump quite far into the void but still nowhere close to the road on the other end. The second one was a bit trickier to work out at first, since Lakitu respawned me back before the ramp when I jumped to the right side, but when I tried going on the left side instead, he was a bit more generous to me. Lakitu isn't as nice however in the 4th glider section, and to be honest, this one is a big problem. I thought this one would work in the same way as the 3rd one when I got there, but on all my attempts, Lakitu was just placing me back onto the road. I thought maybe if I could get a wall ride on the circle and instantly trick I could get a bit further, but the wall was just a bit too thin for that to be possible. I then tested if the spinning points on the outside of the circle could be used in any way, but they don't have a hitbox. The final idea I had was to just jump into the ring itself and get some sort of weird bounce upwards or something, but at this point I was clutching at straws. After many failed tries, I decided to just test how far I would need to go to get a good respawn by using the glider and turning to the right, and even then I was getting placed before the glider ramp. Using the Bowser Real Racer combo didn't make a difference either, so I had to accept that this is the one glider ramp that couldn't be avoided in Mario Kart World. So in the end, 20 of the 30 glider sections in Mario Kart World can be avoided, and all but one of the 32 glider ramps can be avoided. The 10 sections you can't skip are the ending of Shy Guy Bazaar, the cannon on Airship Fortress, the ending of Great Question Block Ruins, the cannon on Bowser's Castle, the big glider on Acorn Heights, and finally 5 out of the 6 gliders on Rainbow Road. If you guys want a challenge for yourselves, see how many of these can be made possible with the feather item. Let me know in the comments how you get on. That's it from me for this video though. If you guys enjoyed, then be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. It goes a long way. Thanks for watching.